Women voters, Central Delaware County. Our program today emerged out of the idea that we needed to really educate people on how important local elections are. And in order to do that, we invited two local township managers, Jane Billings from Swarthmore and Garry Cummings from Nether, Providence.
Jane is a borough. Swarthmore is a borough.
Pardon me, from a borough manager, and is Nether Providence a township? Obviously, I need more civics education, which is why I joined the League of Women Voters. And speaking of that, any of you who are not members of the League of Women Voters, we have a handout on each table with an application form, and we would certainly welcome your joining. Of working for the Minnesota Polluting Control Agency.
Pollution control, not polluting.
Pollution control, thank you. And 4 years working for, pardon me, and 4 years working for the City of Los Angeles. She has served as chair of the Delaware County Consortium of Governments and the Central Delaware County Sewer Authority, and as a member of the Executive Committee of the Association for Pennsylvania Municipal Management and the State Planning Board. She currently serves on the Executive Committee of the Delaware Valley Workers' Compensation Trust and recently received the Carol Symbol Award for 25 years of service from the Pennsylvania State Association of Boroughs. And Garry, I'm going to ask him to introduce himself.
Yeah, I became township manager in 1981. I was at 24 years old and was the youngest township manager in the state. I remember during the interview, they asked me if I planned to stay there very long, and I told them, I don't think so. So anyway, it's funny how things turned out. So I've been in a lot of associations as well, not as many as Jane. So I've been township manager for 37 years.
That's fine.
And probably a couple more.
Thank you. Do you need the microphone?
I don't think so. Can people hear us if we talk without it? Yes?
If you're videotaping it, it helps to have the microphone.
Yeah?
We're going to sort of tag team a little bit. Is it okay with you if we stand? You're okay? I just wanted to talk a little bit about local government and its importance. I know that's why you're here. League of Women Voters is very near and dear to my heart. My mother was a member. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area in the 60s and 70s. So I'll leave you to guess without much question what my political leanings are. I can only tell you that the news is usually on mute in my house these days. So thank you very much for having me. I love talking about local government. Like Garry, I don't quite know how I ended up here. I do know, as I said, I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area in the Berkeley Hills. My dad was a professor at Cal, and my mom was a teacher. And we had a lovely house in the hills, and I could see the Golden Gate Bridge and the Oakland Bay Bridge and sailboats in the bay, sun setting in the west. And I remember when I was about 10 years old looking out at the street and saying to my mom, who's going to remember to pave that? My interest in sort of the minutia. This is while the world is exploding around me, right? The Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement. And I was literally looking at the streets and wondering how that very structure of government would, how that would happen. And last week I was off on Columbus Day and I had to go to media from Swarthmore, and I was so excited to drive on Copples Lane and see Garry's new sidewalks. So I think it's that level of government that is so important. I like to tell a little story again when that it's easy for people to miss. I think you know this, how important what happens at the local level is. And very early on, there was a woman who worked in my office, and her daughter was in an AP US government class at Strathaven. And they were asked to devise their own government, a little group, and that was their end of the semester project, and have a panel come in and ask what, to critique what they had done. So they asked me to do it. Now, this is somebody whose mom works in local government. They know that I work in local government, and their government eliminated local government and state government and county government and was just federal government. Didn't surprise me terribly, because if you look, I mean, you're a very educated and politically savvy group, but if this was a room of this size with regular people, you would know the president, they probably know the vice president, they might know their senators, but as you well know, as you move down the chain on politics, people just don't know. They don't know who their state senators are. They might not even know they have a state senator, a state rep. They might not realize there's a county council. It really is surprising how little people know about those local levels of government when we're the ones you call when there's a pothole in the street, or when the fire truck needs to get there, there needs to be playing fields for kids, trash needs to be collected, although I know that's a hot issue in Nether, Providence Township. That's not actually something that they do. That the sewage is getting out of your home to the sewage treatment plant. All those things are so important at the local level. And I sort of laugh at the idea that you're going to pick up the president and he's going to come and get your trash that was missed. And that whole accessibility thing of local government, I'm lucky enough to have here a former council member, Laura Lavin, and two of my current council members, including David Grove, who will remember this story that I'm about to tell. Somebody asked him last week in an email. Email has made all of our lives a little more interesting, texting, social media. But a constituent wrote to Mr. Grove, president of council, and said, hey, could we do some sort of initiative to show that we're committed to climate change? And so President Grove wrote to me, are we committed to climate change? Is there anything we can do? Yeah, we passed a resolution about that about 6 years ago. We buy all renewable energy credits. We're kind of already there. So he wrote back to this constituent and told her that. She's like, great. Now can we do the following things? And had 5 more things that should happen. And again, that shows the accessibility and importance of local government. So we're going to talk, Gary's going to talk a little bit about the actual structure of local government. And I'm going to talk then, we're both going to talk about 5 different areas where huge policy issues that are important globally, climate change, handicap accessibility, sewage treatment, clean water, are really taken care of at the national level. And in our 60+ years, we've implemented a lot of strategies that, again, started very high up, but the actual boots on the ground is definitely at the local level.
Thanks, Jane. Okay, I'm going to talk about the structure of local government. We get our authority from the state of Pennsylvania, and Nether Providence Township is what's called a first-class township. And we're governed by the first-class township code. So everything we are authorized to do is in this book. And we're authorized by the state of Pennsylvania. Things like purchasing, contracts, taxation, it's all listed here. There's similar codes for boroughs, second-class townships, and cities. There's different types of cities. Chester's like a third-class city. Philadelphia, obviously, is of its own
You have to talk into the top of it.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me better?
Yeah, in front of your mouth.
So anyway, Nether Providence Township is elected by wards. Boroughs, a lot of them are at large. So we have 7 wards now, but a long time ago, like about 20 years ago, we had 6 wards. Because the politics in Delaware County, that wasn't a concern about the wards being split. So back 20 years ago, the wards got split between Democrats and Republicans, and it was 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats. And lo and behold, when we had a reorganization meeting in January, they couldn't reorganize because they couldn't select a president, they couldn't select a vice president, they couldn't select an engineer, they couldn't select a solicitor because everything was 3-3. So anyway, the difference, so wards have their own problem. So the court ordered a 7th ward, which we still have today, So now it's been flip-flopped back and forth between Republicans and Democrats. Anyway, it's so important to have the elected officials decide on lots of different things. One of the biggest arguments, the difference between wards and at large, is everybody's elected by ward, then they have their own little problems they want to solve by ward. So one of our biggest issues is when we resurface roads, all the commissioners can't agree because they want the roads in their ward resurfaced. So that's just an example of what kind of problems there are. But the importance, and generally they all get along other than that, but the importance of electing appropriate officials is they decide what you spend your tax dollars on, and they also decide on how much tax dollars to receive. Some of the things are, as Jane mentioned, and some of the more important things, they decide where to have traffic signals. For instance, we debate about school signals last night at our meeting, whether to expand the school zone. The Board of Commissioners decides that. They decide on whether to buy a new fire truck, old fire trucks, or used fire trucks. They're big issues, big expense items, and they debate them, to ad nauseum. The other things that they decide on are salaries and benefits with contracts that we have to negotiate with the FOP, and we have IBTs called the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. So we have to negotiate these contracts, and the board has to make decisions on whether or not to go back and forth, whether to settle or go through what's called, like in the FOP, it's called binding arbitration. So they're all important decisions. And how much to fund the library, that's always a big debate, because some of the board members like libraries, other ones not sure of the importance of them, even though they are very important. So we have a lot of interesting debates, but it's very important that these elected officials that you elect, they decide all these things every month at every monthly meeting, and it's very, very important. Our board in the Providence Township has been pretty good lately. We've had some road commissioners, but other than that, it's very important for all these reasons to elect a good, sound, judgment-making commissioner.
Yeah, on that subject of taxation, I can't agree with Garry more. And when someone decides to run for one of these local offices, whether it's school board or township commissioners or borough council, the ability to, the hardest thing about the job is that constant decision making, and in the end it's really the budget document that decides almost everything about your municipality. How you're spending your dollars is what you're doing to support your community. I had years ago I was reading, I think it's David McCullough's book on John Adams, and I had a bit of an epiphany when I was reading about their reaction to the Stamp Act. For people who don't remember, the Stamp Act was when Britain was trying to fund or basically come out of their horrible lack of money left after they fought the French and Indian Wars. And they needed money, so they decided to pass this tax. Kind of reminds me of what we call Act 511 taxes, which are those nuisance taxes, per capita taxes, and local services taxes that we're so fond of in Pennsylvania. So they started, every single document that came in got taxed, and there was this big uprising, and that was sort of John Adams becoming very political. And then, of course, the same thing happened with tea, and there was tax on all those goods. And I'm like, really? Like, and I know it's, all this like no taxation without representation, but really what they wanted was no taxation. They didn't want, and I don't want to oversimplify it, I get it, but England was doing some things for the colonies. They were protecting them from what at that time we now know is politically incorrect, basically decimating the local population, the native population, but that costs money, defending, sending new goods here. And people really didn't want to pay, And we are a country that's never really gotten the whole idea that by sharing a tax base, we'll share services. And I'll pave your road this year, and I'll pave your road next year. And we'll all share in the benefits of having no sewage in the streets, as I mentioned before. So it's tough, and it's tough when local officials say to people like us, we don't want the millage rate to go up over 5%. And we're like, great, tell us what you want us to cut. It's all about service delivery. And I think the job of a local official, much more than a manager, is to get up and make sure that their taxpayers understand the benefits. Why are you being taxed? What benefits are you getting? What price are you paying for living in sort of a civil society? Very difficult. It's across all levels of government here. It's no tax, no tax, no tax. Taxes aren't bad. Services are delivered for what it is. And of course, we hope that they're delivered in an efficient manner. But so that's my, again, for those of you who do serve or know people who are thinking of serving, that's probably the hardest job that you will have, is to convince people that you're spending their money wisely. So we're going to talk a little bit about some big picture issues that are actually pretty much worked on at the local level. And I think Gary's going to talk about the ADA and the great improvements in the country for handicap accessibility. We're both going to talk a little bit about clean water. Again, 1974, big act of Congress. Implementation, almost all local. I'm going to talk a little bit about climate change, global issue, mostly implemented or very much implemented at the local level, and then a little bit about planning and zoning and community development.
Thanks, Jane. Yes, there's a federal law, and it's implemented by the state of Pennsylvania, called the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I'm going to talk how that applies to pedestrian and bicycle walkways and trails. Years ago, Nether Providence had a walkway committee that was formed, and they created a walkable Wallingford website.
For which I was very jealous. I could not get an alliteration for Swarthmore that sounded as great as walkable Wallingford.
Yes.
So he got more grant money than I did.
And this group had great vision, and we've started it up again. We have a sidewalk committee that's very active. We've created what's called a traffic calming matrix, has 34 projects listed on it, and we've been crossing those off right and left. We've gotten a number of grants, probably, I hate to brag, but probably more than any municipality in the state of Pennsylvania for our size in recent years. I have a list here. I'm glad to supply people with. A lot of the grants apply to walkways and trails. They total $3.8 million since 2012. Some of the walkways you'll see is we have a new one on Wallingford Avenue, and these are all state funded and as well as federal funds. So the hoops you have to jump through are amazing. There's probably 16 separate submissions you have to make for each of these sidewalk plans. The first sidewalk grant we got, I swore I was never going to apply for another one because it took 13 years to implement. 13 years. That's way too long. Matter of fact, the requirements changed, so you have to resubmit and comply with new requirements. But the ADA requirements, even the Wallingford Avenue sidewalk was held up. It was completed except for a couple things. Relocating Pico poles, which they're a little slow at the jump, and the ADA ramps. So all these ADA ramps, and they're the ones where you see the orange bumpy at every corner. They have to be, it's what's called design build. So you have to submit each individual in detailed slope and grading to PennDOT for approval. And it took them 4 to 5 months to approve our ADA ramps for the Wallingford sidewalk. That's one sidewalk we got. We've got one going on in Coppell's Lane, as Jane mentioned. That's very near completion. and that was a little bit easier to process. It only took a couple of years. We've got approval for a walkway from the Wallingford train station up to Providence Road. We've tried to make walk areas by putting little hash marks and little painting on there, and they just didn't work because they're kind of dangerous. There's no separation. So we've got one going up to Providence Road from the Wallingford train station. We have one that's in development on Moore Road because there's elementary school there, Nether Providence Elementary School, so it's going all the way from Brookhaven Road all the way to the end of Moore Road past the Wallingford Swim Club. We got so many grants in such a short period of time. I want to credit my assistant, Dave Grady. Part of that, it's not 100% funded. You have to fund 20% of this. And the Board of Commissioners, you know, said, we can't fund 20% of this, these 5 major large amounts of money in such a short period of time. We just can't do it. But they didn't want to not accept the grants. And that's a major board decision. So we've got the state to spread them out over the next 3 years. So we got one on Moore Road. We also just got a grant for another walkway to extend the Leaper Smelly Trail, where it ends in Osborne, coming under off Rose Valley Road from Yale Avenue. We've got a walkway approved grant to take it all the way up to Providence Road and to improve that intersection. So these are up here. People want to know all about our grants. But like I said, the federal guidelines that we have to go by, particularly ADA and other ones, and the submissions, they double, triple the size of the expense that we have to go through for these projects, and they extend the time in which you can get them implemented. But like I said, it's very important because the Board of Commissioners, you know, they're on the fence. This is like, you know, you're talking about, you know, $500,000 projects, and you have to pay, you know, 20%, 100,000, and you get 3 or 4 of them. That's a lot of money that we have to put out. But the projects are important, and that's a decision the board makes. Sonia.
I would say, not that we're competitive, not that we don't immediately look when the grant award comes out to see who got more money, but we have, in Swarthmore, we've implemented 3 basically transportation enhancement grants. And again, this money is actually flowing, not the local match part, but the state and federal match is flowing from the highway transportation bills, which are supporting alternative transportation projects, pedestrians and bicycles. So again, that's sort of a national priority. I assure you that when the gas tax came out, there wasn't any money going towards sidewalks, town center revitalizations. We used it to make a pedestrian underpass in Swarthmore, handicap accessible. But it's the local level where you're implementing it, and it's the local level where I'm totally gray under here. Because as Garry said, the implementation really requires the support of the local officials, because you've got to magically come up with this match. And then you have to have enough staff to implement it and explain. We have somebody who comes to every council meeting wanting to know why our handicap ramps aren't done. It's because they've been at PennDOT for 8 months, and he called PennDOT, and PennDOT said they were done. I'm like, no, they're not done. Like, but if you want to put them in yourself, put them in yourself. They're not done, they're not approved, we're not going to get paid for them. So it's that local implementation of a much bigger initiative that we're reaping the benefits, but it's not as easy as it sounds. I want to talk a little bit about climate change, which is, of course, our current president notwithstanding, for most of the world, an initiative, a global initiative, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, reduce temperatures, reduce our carbon footprint, which are great goals. You know, for those people who went to Paris, great for them. I know some Swarthmore College students got to go. They got to write some great statements about what the importance of climate change initiatives. And then what? Like, what do you do? Like, how does it actually happen? And actually, there's a lot that happens at the local level. In Swarthmore, and I know this has happened in Nether, Providence as well, simple things that add up, like changing all of our street lights to LED lighting. Sounds simple, it's actually a thousands and thousands of dollar project. You do reap energy savings, not as much as you'd like, because some of the way the PICO bills. So, but you'll see, I don't know how much you've done in Nether, we're about 10%, about 20% done in Swarthmore, changing to LED lights and traffic lights as well. Purchasing hybrid vehicles, purchasing electric vehicles, little harder than you might think. Police departments want to chase people. They don't think they're going to go fast enough. They don't think they're going to go far enough. So again, you got to provide that leadership that gets you where you want to go. We did the Borough parking lot into a really beautiful, we call it Central Park, and we put an electric vehicle charging station in there. It's something municipalities got to step up to the plate and do that. And then the other one that I mentioned earlier, the borough actually purchases about 525,000 kilowatt hours a year, which is our total usage, in renewable energy credits, again, to make that commitment to, it's mostly wind energy and whatever else. I mean, we don't plug into the grid, but we buy credits that help support alternative clean energy solutions.
Yes, Nether Providence, I'm going to go into something else, but Nether Providence, we just authorized a loan to replace all our LEDs. There's 400 street lights, and we're going to start that in December, and it should take 3 to 4 months. And also Jane, we were part of the DEP greenhouse gas.
I thought we worked that together.
Yeah. We got a pilot program grant from DEP, Swarthmore, Nether Province. I think Rose Valley and Rutledge were involved.
Yeah, yeah.
And they did a greenhouse gas study, like just trying to get a feel on where all the greenhouse gases were coming from, residential, commercial, and different types of heat from residential. So anyway, we do have that study from way back. Next thing I'm going to talk about is the Clean Water Act, as Jane mentioned, and the Stormwater Management Act. Again, these are mandates that have been put on municipalities, and they're expensive, and they're very strict. We have to do so much now. There's a new state program, or it's not new. It's been like a number of 15 so years, but it's called MS4. M stands for municipal. S4 is separate storm sewer systems. So all of our storm sewers, we can't put any stormwater in there without getting a MS4 permit from the state. I'm not sure what would happen if we didn't comply and took our permit away, but I think the stormwater would still go down there. But we would probably be fined heavily. Part of the program, and this program is across the United States. You go to any storm sewer, and you look at any storm sewer inlet across the United States, you can see one of these decals. So people don't realize it, but down in Florida, it's a manatee. Different areas, different amphibians. We have a frog on ours. We've had fishes on that. And what it says, no dumping drains the creek. That's part of the program. It's a very simple part of the program. But we have to do an annual report, and it's a thick, intense report. And they require us to, in detail, go through what's called minimum control measures. And there are 6 of them. And first one is that they require municipalities all across the United States do, is public education and outreach on stormwater impacts. Now we work with the CRC, which is Chester Crum Ridley Creeks Association. They help us with public information. So we get out brochures, we put stuff on our website, we put stuff in our newsletter, and we talk about it at monthly meetings, and we have to document all this as part of this report. If we don't do it, we get a slap on the wrist. Now, and here in Delaware County now, there was one person who would come in, and he was very, very strict when it first came out. And I think it's a good thing, because the waters are being cleaned up. It was a little hard on us, it's hard on our Public Works Department, but the DEP representative, who's no longer with us here, he came down and in the first several years gave notice of violations, NOVs, to 39 municipalities in Delaware County. He said, you're not complying with the Act. You're not complying with the Stormwater Act. You need to do more, you need to do this, you need to do that. I said, are you kidding me? So we had a meeting with him, and I know Jane asked him, what other municipalities do you cover? He goes, well, I cover, you know, Bucks, Montgomery County. He goes, how many notice of violations have been issued in the other 5 or 6 districts of DEP across the state? He goes, well, I'm not sure. He goes, how many do you know of? Well, I'm not sure. He goes, no, across the rest of the state. He said, 1. So the all other 5 districts besides his district, 1 notice of violation. In his, 39. So anyway, it was a good thing, got our attention. Anyway, the second MCM, as it's known, is public involvement participation. And you'll notice that every once in a while, during Earth Day or around there, there'll be creek cleanups. So that's public involvement. We also have talks on rain barrels, and rain gardens, and all this is part of this program. We have 2 demonstration rain gardens, one behind the Township building and one in a park. Those things are all part of this requirement. We love to do it, but it's all been sort of forced upon us. MCM number 3 is illicit discharge detection and elimination system. Now talk about burdensome. And again, these are all good things, but these are things where we don't have any employees to do this. We have to almost even hire somebody. We have to map our storm sewer systems. We have to say where the inlets are, what size pipe comes out, the name of where it drains to, where it comes from, all the inlets. And then we have to test them every year, about a quarter of them, and just see if there's anything coming out of there that's bad. We have to actually test the water. So that's, you can imagine, from not having to do that to having to do that for all the inlets, it's a little burdensome. And again, it's a good thing. It found problems and made us correct them. The MCM number 4, construction site stormwater runoff control. That again is just erosion control, which was there. It's always been there. We've always required people to do erosion control measures while they're constructing new homes and developments. But in addition to that, we physically advise developers and contractors and say, here's what you need to do. Here's what you need to do to make sure your construction site is clean, doesn't cause any erosion to the stream. Number 5, post-construction stormwater management and new development. This is something that's brand new. And this is something that's, again, it's a good thing, but it requires you to maintain facilities in the future. It requires the developer to maintain facilities. You'll see in a larger development where they'll put in a retention basin or a detention basin. You'll see that that's a requirement that there can be no increase in post-development runoff than what was there before. And a lot of times they make you retain more than there was to correct the problem. But when they put the basins in, you require the developer to sign an agreement that they're going to maintain the basin, whoever the property owner is going to maintain that basin in perpetuity, and you record that agreement at the county. So this is the impact of this act. And again, I think it's a good thing, but I'm just telling you, and we have to enforce all that. Number 6, pollution prevention, good housekeeping relates to the municipal operations. So we can't wash our trucks. We have to change our oil in appropriate places. We've got to check our sewer system, our sanitary sewer system. We have to make sure that's operating. And you know, they come down on you pretty hard if you don't follow this thing. But anyway, there's lots of things that you have to do. And just recently, they thought they would add something really cool, which is to make up for past ills, is what's called a pollution reduction program. We're issued permits in 5-year segments, so we're coming up on a new permit, and we have to do what's called a pollution reduction program. So what the state has done, and this again through the federal government, is they have said each of your streams and each of your runoffs in your municipality, they do it by county, create this much runoff in loads. So many pounds of runoff comes in from your, on an average year. So you have to offset that 100% by doing things such as stream bank restoration. You get certain credits. You're not really doing anything to correct an individual problem. They're just saying this is how much estimated loads, and you need to correct these by doing certain things. So we have to do the stream bank restoration. You get certain points for it, the amount of pounds that you can reduct. You can do lots of other things. You can do inlet, retrofit inlets, and do stuff. We're proposing next year to do a lot of stream bank restorations, because you get a lot of points for that at these costs. So we have to reduce 62,832 pounds of loads next year. And that's cost was originally like 200,000 a year, and now we've got it based on this proposal. We had to submit that to the state a couple of weeks ago. 75,000 a year. Again, it's an unfunded mandate, and this is like part of that Clean Water Act. So just want to say, things are going in the right direction, but at the local expense.
Submit a pollution reduction plan for Little Crum Creek and Crum Creek, which actually we share. Which is a little frustrating in Pennsylvania. Local government, I think, has its own challenges. We're so small, our units. And of course, the stream doesn't really know municipal boundaries. So Gary's going to do work in Nether, Providence, probably in Ridley, and in Crum Creek. We're going to do work in Little Crum Creek. We're really dependent on surrounding municipalities to do the same to have the impact on the creeks that we want. We also have a couple projects that we're looking at, stream bank restoration projects. The numbers are so big, I've hardly even shared them with Borough Council. And again, it is an unfunded mandate. We hope that those growing greener initiatives that hopefully you've all voted for they've come from the state, raise money to work on environmental projects. We're hoping that that money will be there. Along those same lines of clean water, which again in the 70s was a really big deal. Waterways in this country were horribly, horribly polluted. We all know that. Again, I think what Garry and I are saying is you just don't realize how much of that cleanup is going on at the most local level. Somehow this notion that the federal government is doing anything more than telling you what to do is pretty much of a fallacy. So the other big thing that came out of that Clean Water Act was the requirement basically that sewage treatment plants had to be a lot better. They had to be a lot cleaner. They were spewing out at times raw effluent into whatever the receiving body was. It could be a bay or an ocean or a stream or a lake, depending on where you are in the country. And the requirements started off pretty heavily funded. The federal government did give a lot of money to upgrade treatment plants. That money is long gone. What we're left with in old communities is old things, old managers, old people, sometimes running things in really old sewer pipes, which are a nightmare. When we say old, we mean leaky, and leaky means that we have a term in sewage treatment, which is one of my favorite things to talk about. It's just the essence of life. Like raw sewage is, you can't even imagine what our lives would be like.
Effluent of life.
Effluent of life. We have Inflow and Infiltration. You may have seen actually a video I did about 10 years for the Delaware County Authority on Inflow and Infiltration. Probably guessing you haven't seen it, but it's where water leaks into the system through leaky pipes in the ground, and because they're old and they're crushed and they're like terracotta, they're like old roof tiles in the ground. I always laugh. Have everyone seen the movie like Batman or Superman where like Lex Luthor is living in like a 35-foot sewer with rats and sewage, I guess. I never quite got that. We don't have that. Most of us have like little 12-inch pipes that are collapsing around us and causing a lot of problems. So we're under mandate to make sure that we don't get water into the system, because then you have to treat it and the sewage treatment plant can't take it and it runs into the street. And we're also under mandate to not have something that are nicely called SSOs, which are sanitary sewer overflows, which is when you see raw sewage spouting out of a manhole, basically. And DEP, our local environmental agency, state agency, and EPA does come down pretty hard on us when we don't take care of the problem. I had a council member, in fact, it might be one of the council member who's here, who said to me once, well, how long will it take before we replace all of our sanitary lines that are underground? And I'm like, we'll never replace them. We're constantly chasing the next disaster, the next one that's falling apart. And we spend money every single year. We just don't spend enough. Again, getting back to that issue of how much are you going to tax or charge in fees, doesn't really matter. Taxpayers consider it all a tax, to fix something like that. We also, just by the by, are required to know how we're going to treat our sewage for about the next 20 years. Under that same federal law, we have to create something called an Act 537 sewage plan. Garry and I are in the same plan. It's done by the county. So we are under mandate to not let new developments in unless we know how their sewage is going to be treated. Again, something that's handled at the most basic local level.
Yeah, it's very important stuff. The next topic I'm going to talk about is like land development and zoning. And again, you know, there's lots of stuff to do in local government, and you deal with all these different things on a daily basis. And unfortunately, a lot of time it's in a crisis situation where there's a sewer overflow or something like that. So land development and zoning. I've been told, and I wasn't around, that back in 1925, Nether, Providence Township had enacted the first zoning code in the state of Pennsylvania. So that was a good thing, and zoning limits the location and type of development. So in Nether Providence, they kept it mostly residential, and that was the bad thing that they did. It's a very nice community. Been ranked ninth best in the country by Money Magazine, and there's certain parameters with that. You know, it's not the ninth best overall. But in keeping it residential, what they've done is we don't have a tax base. So a lot of municipalities who had foresight in Chester County, they zoned areas for industrial, commercial, and passed along highways, and now their real estate taxes aren't as high as Nether Providence Township through the Wallingford Swarthmore School District, because we're almost 90% residential. We have very little commercial, very little office. So residential puts more kids in the schools. School taxes are higher versus somebody who just pays taxes to go to all the entities, the county, the township, and the school district, without putting a burden on the schools. So anyway, that's very important. And we're deciding today where you can put, and we're required to allow for lots of different things. We have to allow for cell towers. You can't just exclude them. There's things called exclusionary zoning, which Nether Providence Township again was the first in one of the first exclusionary zoning cases, because we didn't allow apartments. And the courts finally came down and said, you can't do that. You're in a path of development. You have to allow for apartments. We lucked out because when we're found to have exclusionary zoning, the owner of the property can put on whatever he wants. It's in effect found that you have no zoning, which we did. We had somebody want to knock down the trees, cut the trees down, sell the lumber, sell the topsoil, quarry some stone, make it nice and flat on 40 acres, and put up 273 mobile homes. So anyway, Township lived longer than that person, so we finally bought it off of his wife, and now it's a park. So, those are the type of decisions that municipalities have to make. Sometimes you don't negotiate, even though you're spending a lot of legal fees in court, you don't negotiate with the developer on those issues. And eventually, the board decided, let's apply for grants, and let's go out for a borrowing, and let's buy these last parcels of ground. So they're the things that are important with zoning, and they have an ongoing effect for the quality of life in your municipality. So again, it's the Board of Commissioners who make these decisions, and they're tough decisions, and it's very, very important that they make a decision which benefits all the residents going forward. And a lot of times the residents don't think it benefits them, but in general, that's their job.
Sort of along those same lines, and I know we probably should wind up, sort of on community and economic development and zoning, there has been, I think, a shift in many parts of the country towards various things called new urbanism, transit-oriented development, trying to get away from the very car-dependent, sprawling suburbs that have been allowed to develop in many places throughout the country. And attempting to sort of rein that in and become, have more transit facilities, more sense of place, and again, reducing the sprawl. And that really speaks again to local officials and local planning commissions really looking at their existing zoning and making sure that they're not stuck in how the country was 25 years ago. Our zoning code, I thought we had the first zoning code in Pennsylvania.
I think we do.
Anyway, we were in the 20s, which was a long time ago, and the case that even allowed zoning was in the 20s. So clearly, we were both on that. It was a case in Euclid, which I think is in Ohio, Euclidean zoning, which I always thought had to do with geometry, but it doesn't. It's from the town of Euclid. But clearly we're both on the forefront, and it did help control the communities, it's true. But any local government has to look and make sure, is it still relevant? Our code was last updated in a comprehensive way in 1974, and then since then the Planning Commission and Borough Council has adopted some new regulations for our town center. But we're currently looking, and I think it's very exciting, we have an aging population that would like to stay in town, and is there anything in the zoning now that is prohibiting that from happening? Is there a way that people should be able to live together? We don't allow more than 3 unrelated people to live in the same home. That's a very common, particularly in college towns, it's a very common zoning restriction. Well, what if, in my block, there's about 6 families, we've all raised our kids together, we're always joking, hey, it'd be great to buy a house, we'd share a kitchen, cook together, and then go back to our own places. There's nowhere in Swarthmore where you could legally do that right now, and that's a prohibition that probably needs to change somehow. But as Garry said, then this job of these local officials is to make sure that you're addressing the needs of the community and not addressing other people who might find it something that they don't care for. So I think it's an exciting time to be looking at issues like that, but they do remain complicated.
Closing arguments? No. The other problems is better. No, just kidding.
See, that's why countries can't work together.
Now, just in closing, I do have a list of grants up here, and just a little further into what Jane says about zoning, and I'm not sure she knows about this, but just this last month, we've got 2 major zoning requests. Number 1 is from Swarthmore College, wants to put a cell tower on the College Woods. Do you know about that?
I did not know about that.
So that's in early stages. We'll push that to our planning commission. And the second part, 2 doctor's offices, which are really home offices on Balmer Pike, 116 and 120 East Balmer Pike. They both requested to change to professional office from the R2 zoning. So there's a couple of decisions and other decisions that come up on a monthly basis, and will have an impact down the line. So last thing, I'm announcing that Nether Providence Township and Media Borough, Swarthmore supports this, have an electronics recycling and shredding event on Saturday, November 18th, 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. at the Acme here.
Is this by that?
Yes, it's by that group.
That's a great, yeah.
Anyway, so everything is free, and we have e-waste and shredding, except for 2 TVs and 2 monitors are $30. So, but if you want a list of grants, see the varying grants we got it up here.
Stop.
I do not have a list of grants. And we don't have a card, but we did have one recycling event. Actually, this is a great group. This is this Pennsylvania Recycle Works. By the way, electronics recycling was another unfunded mandate. All of a sudden, you just couldn't put electronics in a regular hazardous waste disposal. And everybody's calling the municipal offices, what do I do with my TV? We had no idea. So, but again, we have kind of taken up the slack, and all municipalities and our consortium of governments has been working on this as well. But this particular group was started and is completely run by people who are coming out of the prison system, and this is a business that was started by somebody who'd been working with the prison communities, and I think it was one of his children who had been incarcerated and came out, and they're providing jobs, not only collecting, but they're actually doing the sorting and recycling of the electronics. So our Council of Governments, we do work together, despite how it seems up here, and this is one of the groups that we're supporting. Well, I'd be happy to take any questions if anyone has any.
Do you need the microphone?
No, I can speak loud. I have a question for Jane and a question for Garry. Jane, I want to know, as a municipality, what is the next level of EPA that you deal with? Do you deal exclusively with the state EPA, or do you deal with the regional office of the US EPA?
We deal almost none with the EPA. EPA delegated almost all of their regulatory authority to the local state organizations. So in Pennsylvania, it's a department, it used to be, what was it when we started? It's now DEP, Department of Environment. They used to be with DCNR. In Delaware, it's DENREC. So we have very little to do with them. If you go to a meeting with DEP for instance, to talk about sanitary sewer overflows and somebody from EPA is there, you're in trouble.
I can understand. I've got one question for Garry. When your commissioners have their lively debates, do they have them in public meetings so that the constituents who are there can listen to them, or do they have them privately?
Well, under the law, they have to have them publicly. And they do have them publicly. And we're on TV, and everybody's invited to come, although they may limit speaking times, but all of our debates are in public. There's the Sunshine Law, which prohibits 3 or more elected officials from talking about any business that would result in a decision at any time. So if they're going at the bowling alley and the 3 of them are bowling, you really can't talk about business.
Questions? How secure are our voting machines? Number 1. Number 2 is, what's the status of the reassessment project that's happening over the next 3 or 4 years?
We relegate almost everything having to do with voting as a county function. So those machines show up. We have no idea where they came from, when they've been calibrated, what kind of shape they're in. We give them our space. Almost all municipal buildings are voting sites, and that's as much as we know. The reassessment, we hear and read about it the same as you do. The county is not, there's no point really where they bring municipalities in on those decisions.
It's true.
Thanks.
Marita?
I just wanted to say that back in 1980 or thereabouts, we were building the Blue Route, and we also had a league committee called Sidewalks and Walkability, and we're the ones that got those stripes painted on the road between the train track and Street 20, and also the ones that got the sidewalk up between the library and Baltimore Pike, because we we needed walkability in the town in that time. And we had this wonderful committee, and we made this wonderful report. We also are the ones that found that the Blue Route could have a walkway built in at the cost of the expense of the federal government who was building the road, or whoever was building the road. And that's why we got the walkway in the woods and other towns in line, between Leesburg and wherever it is. I just wanted to bring that up.
Thank you very much. Oh, one more.
Grant writing, you emphasize that. With all that you do, how do you get the time to write grants? Who does it?
It's difficult, but you know, we like to do it in-house. A lot of municipalities hire grant people. But we just have to make the time. There's deadlines. And nowadays you have to do them online. And you're limited to the number of characters there. So you have to be very succinct. When I hired my assistant, who had an MPA, Master's Public Administration, and he had a CPA, he knew nothing about grants. And now he's writing these grants, and we're being successful because he dots his I's and crosses his T's more than I did. He would interact with the state and say, what do you want, and what do you want, and interact enough where when they got the grant, they knew who this guy was, and they knew that he called them and had interest. And it does take time to write a good grant. But you have to make it if you're interested in getting these types of funds and these types of projects funded.
Yeah, and there's nothing worse than reading in the paper that a fellow that a nearby municipality has gotten a grant that you knew that you were eligible for.
I apologize.
Yeah. He only writes all these grants now because the borough had gotten them first. So, it is really important, and I think people underestimate. First of all, how many grants are out there, unfortunately, which means that you really have to go after the ones that are there. We have grants that support recycling and, again, all these sidewalks and transportation enhancements. So it is. Oh, and he's telling, oh yeah, the state's going to raid those funds. Yeah, never let them raid that recycling fund. That actually, anyone who thinks recycling pays for itself is like not reading anything, because it's a lost leader. It costs so much money, and we really depend on the little bit of money that we get from the state to help support the program. So we just do it, and I think, again, most local officials will make sure that their staff has enough time to get it done.
Thank you very much.